There is a moment most people never recognize until it is already too late. It does not look like rage. It does not sound like revenge. It is not a screaming match, a dramatic message, or one final emotional breakdown. It is silence. A very specific kind of silence. The kind that comes from a person who used to care too much, explain too much, forgive too much, and wait too long. Then one day, something changes. The warmth disappears. The excuses stop. The person who once tried to understand every part of you suddenly looks at you like they are finally seeing the full picture. No anger, no begging, no negotiation. Just a calm, quiet distance that feels impossible to cross. And that is the moment many people realize they did not break a weak person. They exhausted a patient one. This is what happens when a deeply empathetic person reaches their limit. Not the social media version of empathy. Not the fantasy that kind people are endlessly soft, endlessly forgiving, endlessly available. Real empathy is not weakness. It is work. It is emotional labor. It is noticing the shift in someone's voice before anyone else does. It is sensing tension in a room before a word is spoken. It is giving people more context than they deserve because you can feel the pain behind their behavior. And that is exactly why empathetic people are so often underestimated. People mistake their patience for blindness. They mistake their forgiveness for permission. They mistake their silence for lack of awareness. That is the first mistake, because the person who says nothing may be seeing everything. Every lie, every pattern, every contradiction, every apology that sounds perfect but changes nothing. Every moment where the story does not match the behavior. A deeply empathetic person often notices far more than they admit. They notice when your tone changes. They notice when your apology is designed to end the conversation, not repair the damage. They notice when you use guilt to avoid accountability. They notice when you turn their kindness into a place to hide. But at first, they do not always react. That is the part people misunderstand. They do not stay quiet because they are stupid. They stay quiet because they are still trying to understand you. They are still trying to separate the wound from the pattern. They are still asking themselves whether you are hurting them because you are lost, or because you have learned that they will keep letting you. And for a while, they will give you space. They will explain your behavior to themselves. He had a hard childhood. She is under pressure. They do not mean it that way. They are just scared. They are not trying to manipulate me. They are just afraid of being abandoned. That kind of generosity can look beautiful from the outside. But inside, something is being recorded. Not in a cold or calculated way. In a protective way. The mind starts keeping track. Not because the person wants revenge. Because the body is trying to survive. The first time you lie, they may forgive you. The second time, they may ask why. The third time, they may begin to notice the rhythm. Then comes the fourth, the fifth, the apology, the promise, the repeat. At some point, the pattern becomes louder than the explanation, and that is where the danger begins. Not danger in the violent sense, not danger because the empathetic person wants to destroy you, danger because the version of them that protected your image begins to disappear. For a long time, they may have been holding a softer picture of you in their mind. They looked at your selfishness and saw insecurity. They looked at your anger and saw fear. They looked at your manipulation and told themselves it came from pain. They gave you the benefit of context. They gave you the better interpretation. They kept choosing the version of you that you might become. But when the line is crossed too many times, something shifts. The question changes. It is no longer, why are they acting this way? It becomes, why am I still allowing this? That is the turning point. And most people miss it, because the turning point is quiet. There may be no dramatic fight, no final warning, no long paragraph explaining everything, just a subtle withdrawal, shorter replies, less explaining, less emotional availability, less interest in fixing what they did not break. At first, the person who has been taking advantage of them may not even notice. They assume everything is normal. They assume another apology will work. They assume the same old sentence will reopen the same old door. I did not mean it. You are overthinking. I was just stressed. You know how I am. I will do better. But this time, something feels different. The empathetic person does not argue. They do not rush to comfort. They do not explain your behavior back to you. They simply listen. And in that listening, you can feel the change. Because they are no longer listening with hope. They are listening for confirmation. That is the moment everything becomes dangerous for the person who thought kindness was weakness. The old tactics stop working. Guilt does not land the same way. Sadness does not pull them back in. Anger does not scare them into compliance. Charm does not reset the room. The empathetic person has seen the pattern too many times. And once someone recognizes a pattern, they cannot unsee it. That is why the final stage can feel so cold. It is not cruelty. It is clarity. For a long time, empathy made them interpret your behavior emotionally. They felt your pain. They considered your history. They imagined your fear. They made room for your excuses. But when the cost becomes too high, the mind stops protecting the connection and starts protecting the self. The person who once felt everything begins to observe. They watch what you do, not what you promise. They hear the apology, but measure the behavior. They notice the pause before the lie. They notice the timing of the guilt trip. They notice how your vulnerability appears only when you are about to lose access. And that observation changes everything. Because now, they are no longer trapped inside the emotional storm with you. They are standing outside it, watching, understanding, deciding. This is why people often describe the final silence of an empathetic person as frightening. It does not feel like normal distance. It feels final. Because it usually is. By the time a deeply empathetic person becomes silent, they have often already tried everything. They tried explaining. They tried softening the truth. They tried seeing your side. They tried waiting. They tried lowering their expectations. They tried forgiving the same wound with different words around it. So when they stop, it is not impulsive. It is not a mood. It is the result of a long internal process nobody else saw. That process may have taken months, sometimes years. And by the time you notice the change, they may already be emotionally gone. This is where the door closes. Not with violence, not with hatred, with decision. The door slam is not always blocking someone on every platform, although sometimes it looks like that. It is deeper than that. It is the moment a person removes you from the part of their mind that still hopes you will change. That is what makes it so difficult to reverse. You are not fighting anger anymore. Anger can be reached. Anger still cares. Anger still wants something. Anger still has a thread connected to the other person. But indifference is different. Indifference does not argue. It does not chase. It does not check if you understood. It does not need you to admit what you did. It simply stops participating. For the person who relied on the empath's emotional availability, this can feel like punishment. But it is not punishment. It is withdrawal from a role they never should have been forced to play. For too long, they may have acted like your emotional safety net, your translator, your excuse maker, your repair system, your witness, your comfort, your quiet defender. They held the parts of you other people would have rejected. They kept seeing potential when your behavior gave them evidence not to. And when that disappears, the loss can feel brutal, not because they attack you, because they stop protecting you from the truth. That is the mirror effect. A deeply empathetic person often reflects back the best version of someone. They see what you could be. They see the hurt under the damage. They see the frightened child under the arrogance. They see the insecurity under the control. They make people feel understood in a way that can become addictive. But when they detach, that mirror changes. The flattering reflection is gone. Now you are left with your behavior as it is. No softening, no emotional translation, no warm explanation, just the facts. You lied, you manipulated, you took, you apologized and repeated. You used their patience as cover. You confused access with love. And now the person who once helped you avoid that truth is no longer helping. That is why some people panic when an empathetic person finally leaves. They are not only losing the person, they are losing the version of themselves that person helped them believe in. Without the empath's forgiveness, they have to sit with what they did. Without the empath's understanding, they have to hear how empty their excuses sound. Without the empath's warmth, they have to feel the cold shape of their own behavior. So they try to pull the person back. They send messages. They apologize again. They say they finally understand. They bring up the past. They mention the good memories. They cry. They blame stress. They say they were scared. They say no one understands them like that person did. And maybe that is true. Maybe no one did. But that is exactly why the damage matters. Because the person who understood your darkness was also the person you chose to drain. This is the part many people cannot accept. Love does not create infinite access. Empathy does not cancel boundaries. Understanding someone's pain does not require becoming a permanent container for their damage. A kind person can love you and still leave. A patient person can understand you and still decide they are done. A forgiving person can forgive you and still never let you close again. That is not contradiction. That is self-respect. The most dangerous mistake you can make with a deeply empathetic person is assuming their softness means they have no limit. They do have a limit. It may be far away. It may take longer to reach than most people's. They may give more chances than they should. They may stay past the point where others would have left. But once that limit is reached, it is rarely negotiated. Because by then, the decision is not emotional anymore. It is protective. They are not asking whether they love you. They are asking whether staying near you costs them their peace, their clarity, their body, their self-respect. And when the answer becomes yes, love is no longer enough. That is the part nobody wants to hear. Sometimes love is present, and leaving is still necessary. Sometimes compassion remains, and access is still revoked. Sometimes the person still understands exactly why you became who you are, but they no longer volunteer to be harmed by it. That is the final transformation. The empathetic person does not become heartless. They become selective. They do not stop feeling. They stop offering their feelings to people who weaponize them. They do not become cruel. They become unavailable to patterns that once survived because they were too understanding. And from the outside, that can look cold. But from the inside, it is survival. Because there is a hidden cost to absorbing people for too long. The body remembers. It remembers the tension before a difficult conversation. It remembers the alertness when a message appears. It remembers the exhaustion after explaining the same boundary again. It remembers the confusion of being hurt, then comforting the person who hurt you. Over time, the body starts responding before the mind has language. The stomach tightens, the chest gets heavy, the shoulders rise, the phone lights up, and something inside says, "Not again." That is not overreacting. That is information. A deeply empathetic person may ignore that information for a long time because they are trained to care about other people's feelings first. But eventually, the body becomes louder than the guilt. Eventually, peace becomes more valuable than being understood. Eventually, the need to survive becomes stronger than the need to be kind. And when that happens, the person who once kept explaining stops. They stop writing paragraphs. They stop asking for basic respect. They stop trying to prove the pain was real. They stop trying to make you understand the damage while you are still benefiting from it. They simply step back, and that step back can feel like a disappearance. Not because they vanished suddenly, but because you were not paying attention while they were slowly leaving. They left a little every time you dismissed them, a little every time you twisted the story, a little every time you apologized without changing, a little every time you made them feel guilty for reacting to harm, a little every time they had to shrink themselves to keep the peace. By the time they are gone, they may have already left 100 times internally. The final goodbye is only the moment the outside catches up with the inside. This is why the silence feels so complete. They have already grieved the version of you they hoped was real. They have already mourned the connection. They have already begged reality to be different. They have already fought the guilt. They have already asked themselves whether they are being too harsh. They have already made excuses for you and then watched those excuses collapse. So, when they finally close the door, they are not trying to teach you a lesson. They are ending the lesson they kept forcing themselves to repeat. There is a difference. And if you are the person who has been pushing someone like this, you need to understand what you are risking. You are not only risking the relationship, you are risking the one place where your worst parts were seen and still met with patience. You are risking the person who could read your silence and still respond gently. You are risking the person who gave you grace before you had earned it. You are risking the person who knew the story behind your damage and still hoped you would choose something better. That kind of person does not appear often, and when they leave, they do not always come back. Not because they hate you, because they finally believe what your behavior has been telling them. If someone like that is still in your life, do not confuse their patience with permission. Do not confuse their forgiveness with forgetfulness. Do not confuse their empathy with the absence of self-respect. And if you are the empathetic person listening to this, the one who always understands, always explains, always absorbs, remember this. Your ability to see someone's pain does not obligate you to stay inside it. Your compassion is not a contract. Your patience is not a prison. Your kindness is not proof that you should tolerate being harmed. You can understand someone and still step away. You can love someone and still choose yourself. You can feel deeply and still close the door. Sometimes the most powerful thing an empathetic person can do is not forgive again. It is stop negotiating with a pattern that already showed them the truth. The most dangerous moment is not when a kind person becomes angry. It is when they become clear. Because anger can still be persuaded. Guilt can still be triggered. Hope can still be manipulated. But clarity has no handle. Once a person sees the pattern, once they understand the cost, once they stop mistaking your pain for permission to hurt them, there is nothing left to bargain with. There is only the door, and the sound it makes when it finally closes. That is the lesson inside this case.